At any point have you got questions? I'm relying on your questions to steer me in the right direction as to what you want to know about the knife. Okay. So as Monty said, basic, anything above 10.5 inches is going to be your Bowie knife. This is 13 inches. Your width can vary. Generally, I'm at about 40-45. Gives me a nice sort of balance between the length of the blade and the width. It's proportionate wise. Yeah, so I just said to everybody, please, at any point, I'm relying on questions.
How do you do that proportion?
In the directions. Really, it's just my eye. So the longer it is, the wider generally it's going to start to become. Proportionately. Just gives you that nice balance. Okay. When it comes to forging the knife, important thing is what Monty mentioned is your distal taper. That's going to give you a really nice balance over your whole knife. So essentially, you want to taper all the way from here, right the way down to the front of your knife, and that brings all the mass towards the center of the knife. Okay, we do the same thing on the tang also. We taper the tang from the back towards the front. And just get my screwdriver. And that also is going to distribute the mass. If you have a tang that's thick all the way back, it's also going to be too heavy in the handle. You don't want a heavy handle, you don't want a heavy blade. You want that balance to be somewhere about 1.5 inches to 1 inch in front of your guard, about there somewhere. So that's going to give you that forward mass that you need to get that nice horsepower in your strike, but it's going to keep the knife nicely balanced towards your hand where you don't feel like you've got a heavy blade or a heavy handle. Okay, so I'll just unscrew this and you can see the tang has also got a small taper to it. Okay, so if you have a look there, you can see it's got a small distal taper towards the back. It's also very important to get your guard fitted up because you need this thing to slide up and be only in contact at its tight position up top here. All the way down here, you want it to miss it completely. Right? So you can see here, as far as your tang construction, you want to find a nice balance between your steel. You have a nice strong tang, but not like so wide that you've got now only 2 mils of wood on the outside. You want to find that happy balance between the two, where you've got a strong tang and also a good 5 or 6 millimeters of wood on either side of your handle. Okay. So you can see there behind the shoulders, I'll generally drop it down. You don't want to go too big with those shoulders, otherwise when you cut down for your next stage, you're going to be too small again. And the bigger your shoulders are, the more difficult it is to get a good fit up on your front of your guard. Because that material underneath that shoulder there has got to be removed so that you can get a good seat. Okay? So the bigger that area is, the more of a ball ache it's going to be. You don't want to make it too small either, otherwise it becomes a problem as well when you start trying to file the holes open. Okay, so you can see at the back we've got a small gap, and in front completely closed everywhere. Right. So the trick to milling a guard, machining your guard to get a nice fit, what I do is I'll first drill my holes. So if I'm trying to make a 7 mil slot, I'll drill it maybe 6 mil. That gives me 0.5 mil on either side that I need to remove. If you can, because sometimes also what happens is when you're drilling your pilot hole, your holes may be misaligned by a small amount. So if you only leave yourself 0.25 on either side, you're asking for trouble. Okay. Once you've got that opened up, I put a chainsaw file in my hole and I'll chainsaw file it open. Unless I'm lazy or if this is very small, go to the milling machine and mill it open. Now, what's nice to do is if you've got a particularly thick guard, is to machine out the back oversize. So if I've got a 7 mil hole in the front, or let's make it easy, I'll say I've got a 6 mil hole in the front, I will mill out the back 3/4 of the way through with an 8 mil. And then I've only got to worry about trying to get my shoulders on the front here filing that last little 2 mil or 3 mil little shoulder that's left there. That makes life a lot easier. Okay. Now when it comes to getting your perfect fit, what I'll do is next to my holes that I've drilled, that I've now filed open, I've got a raggedy sort of hole there. I take a high-speed steel bit, which you buy for your, like a lathe tool, just a shiny piece of high-speed steel, a little like 10 by 10 or a 7 by 7 or whatever it is. And then I'll put that on there and I'll super glue that on there. And I'll clamp that in the vise and I'll file along there. Once you hit that high-speed steel, it's so hard, your file just glazes over the top of it. It can't bite into that steel. So you slide over the steel and it gives you that perfectly flat line. Okay?
Thank you very much for that.
All right. Once you've done that, now I'll take my vernier. I'll go to my shoulders and I'll measure there. And while I'm on there, I'll tighten it up. And then because I've got my taper, I'll slide it off backwards. And then I use the back of the vernier and I push it up against the inside of my plate, which is still glued there, and I use the back side of the vernier to scribe a line on this side, which now should be, if we've done everything right, slightly beyond my holes that I've drilled. I break that off, I just slam it on the table or put it in the vise and hit it with a hammer, it comes off, or if you want to, you can heat it up with a torch or something and it loosens the glue, and then you can take it off. Then I clean it up on the disc, and then I put on that side, super glue it on my line, and I file to the line. That generally gets me right where I want to be. Ideally what you want is you want that to now slide up till about here somewhere, and then it should be closed. Then the rest of the way you're driving it on. So I take a square tubing and just slide it over my tang. It sits on both sides, and I hit the square tubing and drive it down. And that last bit, that's the friction fit now. So that gives you that tight squeeze fit that you're looking for. Okay. If you go too far and you file your holes are too big now, okay, like I'm talking way worst case scenario, you're like 2 mils over the size. You can't peen that closed, okay? So the trick to that is then, you put your guard on, you go to the anvil, and you blixen the thing with a hammer. And it just smushes it closed. Enough that you can now peen the front surface closed, okay? So that's worst case scenario. In good case scenario, you've gotten it close enough, but there's a little bit of a gap. Perfect scenario, you've got it right, it slides up just shy, and you hammer it on. That happens from time to time. You get it just right. If you don't, you take it off, take a little hammer, a little ball peen hammer, you polish up the one side, you buff it up so it's nice and shiny, and you just carefully peen on the surface here. But your peening must be the same all the way. You don't want to be heavy shot and soft shot. You want to just be bouncing that little hammer. Boop, 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 boop. And what it's going to do is, as you hit the corner, it kinks that corner over, it folds it over like that, making your hole smaller now, all the way around. Okay? Then you drive it back on again, and whatever material was smushed in is now, because it's only the top shoulder, when you hammer it on with enough force, the Bowie knife, the tang, will squeeze out the excess. Then you slide it off again, you put it on the disc, you take it off, and you should have a perfect fit. If you don't have a perfect fit, rinse and repeat. Put it back on, see where the gap is, take it off. Peen, 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 disc, put it back on, and eventually you're going to get there. It's going to give you that perfect fit. Okay? So in saying that, know that you want to start with something a little bit thicker. So you can peen and remove material, and then whatever's left, once you've got that front surface right, you grind the rest away from the back to get you down to your final dimension that you want to be at. Okay? To get your shoulders, to get a nice fit on your shoulders, you're going to, like I said, you're going to drive that sucker on. When you get close there, you really want to hammer it hard onto the shoulder. And whenever you do your little shoulders here, inevitably, ideally what you want is a small little radius on these shoulders here. You can get it square if you machine it or whatever, you know, but it's actually not good. It's a stress riser to have any little 90-degree corner. So it's best to have small little radiuses in there. But because of that little radius, when you push that on, it's going to hit the shoulder, your square shoulder there, and it's going to stop there. It's not going to want to go any further. Okay? So you're going to blixen it on. You're going to hit it hard, and it's going to sink in somewhat, making an imprint on the front of your guard here. Now, if it goes all the way, great stuff. If it doesn't, it's going to stop a bit sharp. You're going to take your scrubber and you're going to scrub the extremities of your shoulder here onto the front of your guard. Okay? That's going to give you a line that's sitting up here away from the outside of your hole, probably about 5 mil above where your hole ends. Okay? Then you're going to put that in a vise, nice 45-degree angle like that, and you're going to just file away all this material that's sitting underneath your shoulders, as much as you can, 90% of that material. So if you pass this around and have a look, you'll see it's only making contact just on the corners and along the edge there. The rest of the material is all being filed away, so that's how you're going to get it to sink down and sit properly. Okay. Once you've done that now, you're going to drive it on and get it to fit properly. It's probably going to sink in a little bit further. You've got to watch out. Sometimes when you drive it in too far, it'll drag the material with you like that. So even though you've got a good fit, it looks like there's a small gap because it's been pulled in. Okay? So what you want to do then is once you've got that smushed in, take it off, disc it, and take away that little bit that's smushed in until you get that clean shoulder again, polish it up, and then you're going to put it on again. And then to drive it on again the last time now, you're going to put just a piece of G10 or something like that, cut a hole, put that on the back of your guard, so when you're hammering it on, you're not going to damage the back of your guard. Okay? When it comes to now your bolster, so now it's essential if you're going to be doing like a tear down or any Bowie construction like this where you've got many pieces, 4, 5, 6 pieces, that when you've done your guard, that guard is done now. When you start doing your handle, you cannot change the shape of that guard, otherwise you're going to affect everything behind there. Because your angle of your screw at the back here has been set by where your bolster hits your guard. So if I take this off and I change the shape of that, it's going to alter this angle a little bit like that. Even the smallest amount is going to misalign my screw now at the back. Okay, I've only got 0.5 of a millimeter on the outside of my hole. I make this 6 mil, then my screw is 8, and then my head is probably about 12. So I drill my hole 8.5, so I've got a little bit of play on either side to move things around. But you can't change anything. If you change the front face of this, it affects everything. Okay, so once you do everything, it's piece by piece by piece. You get it perfect, and then you move on to the next one. And you don't change anything beyond that point. Okay.
So I just want to ask.
Yeah,
so once
please.
you've done the little spacer, and then you're going to drill the hole in your handle material.
Yeah.
So do you drill all the way through the first time, or do you just drill it down and then?
It depends. If you're going to do a screw like this,
Yeah, like
then
that.
it's all the way through. So what I normally do is, so you're going to take your knife, you're going to put it onto your block of wood. This is dirty now, I'm going to have to take it home. You put you've got your guard on, you've got your bolster, right? You're going to put your wood on there and decide, how much, you got your drawing already, you have to do a drawing. So you can see how far does the block need to be down, to make sure you're big enough to accommodate all your curls and whatever. I'll draw a line around there. Now this is going to be a slight taper. You're wanting it to taper this way as well as this way.
Yeah.
Okay. Once you've got your lines drawn on there, they're going to be tapering like this. So I'll set it up in the drill press so that those side lines that are skew, I'll do one that's straight like that, and I'll drill down that one side, and then I'll change it to the other side so that that's straight, and I'll drill down all the way down the other side. Okay. Otherwise, sometimes what I'll do is like for something like this where I'm going all the way through, I've got a long series 8 mil. And I know it's going to be a 6 to 7 mil tang. I'll drill an 8 mil square right down the middle of my V that needs to be opened up, and then so that's 8 mil, it's oversized. And I'll put a 6 mil broach in there, and then I'll just broach out like a keyhole on either which side. So the fact the middle is big doesn't matter because it's locked up by the fact that those are the correct size. And then just get in there with your rasp and file it open. Just keep checking. You want to go a little bit by a little bit. You don't want anything to slam in there, and now it's going to be moving around all over the place. You want to get it tight fit as you can. Okay. Now with the bolster, so same story. You're going to measure your width of your area here. So now right behind my guard, I draw a line, I take my guard off, and then I'll step my shoulders in again a little bit so that I've got a bit more material. You can see how tight that is already. I've only got 5 mil. Had I not stepped that in, I would have like a millimeter. Okay? Because for me, my preference is that I like my handle to be exactly the same as my ricasso. I don't like it smaller, I don't like it bigger. It doesn't look right to me. Okay? If you look at any of the master smiths, that's the procedure. Your ricasso is in line with your guard. It just aesthetically looks right. You do get some of the old school knives where the handle is very much smaller than the actual dimension of the guard of your ricasso. Ricasso is like yay big, and the handle is half the size. Okay, and it's not terrible. There's some but for me aesthetically that's the rule I stick to. Okay. As far as dimension goes, I'm about 27 millimeters here. 28 millimeters is where I like to be. 30 is a bit big, and I find 27 is just right. Okay, so that's my dimension there. Now I've got that stepped in, then I'm going to measure my new steps here, mark that dimension there, mark that onto my bolster, it needs to go on, drill it, file it open with a chainsaw file, and then we're going to slide that sucker on. Now, if it's too big, you can see there, these little pop marks here, that's just to get it to stop wobbling around. So you put it on and it's got a little bit of play. Wherever there's a little bit of a gap, you take your pop mark, your center punch, and you put it just inside the edge. So when you start hammering, it starts to just drive in the material just a little bit, enough that it now can't jiggle around anymore. So every time you put it on, it's in the same position. Okay. Once you've done that, then you're going to pierce your handle, you're going to file your handle. Once that's done, you drive it on behind your bolster. You've got a clean fit, nice and flush, perfect. Take your bolster off, and then you're going to drill a 2 millimeter hole wherever you've got room. Okay, on the outsides or above and beyond over here. Drill a 2 more holes separately from this, because if you try and glue it onto there and drill straight in there, you're going to have a problem, because what happens is as you push out the other side, a little bit of burr, and then it pops it off. Okay, you don't get a good fit. So you drill that separate. Once it's drilled, you touch up the back face where the burr is, get rid of that burr, and then you put it back on there. Then you put your handle behind there, and then I put a drop of super glue on there, I take everything off, and then I go to the drill press, and I just use my existing holes, and I just drill a little bit into the handle. It doesn't need to be far. The problem is when you're doing it by hand like this, it's difficult to set it up once you've shaped your handle in the vise. So I just do it by hand. But by doing it by hand, your angle is going to be naturally just slightly, one way or the other. So the deeper you go, the more trouble you cause yourself, because now it's trying to get straight down a long way. If you just get through here and peep in, a mil or two is enough. All we're trying to do is lock this in position so it doesn't move around. And if you want to do some filing on this, you can take it apart, do your filing, put it back together, and it's going to locate exactly where it was before. You're not going to have any little bits sticking up anyway. Okay. Once you pin that on, depending on what you want to do. So for me, if I'm not doing anything else, I'll super glue it on. Klar. It's now not going anywhere, and then I work with it like that. Okay. Then it comes to the back here. This is the part that took me a little while to figure out as far as transferring holes, because here it's easy. You can drill from the top through to this one. This one here, you want to locate pins from this plate into here, but not without drilling from the back side. Okay. So what I do there is I'll take a piece of G10. I will. Once I've got this to this stage, super glue that, take a threaded rod, put it through there 6mm, put a nut on this side, and then put a nut on that side. Put a piece of G10 on the back, screw the nut close so that's holding my G10 in position. I'll draw my line around this side, take that off, grind it to the line. So I know where it's going to fit, right? Then I take it off and I have a look at my hole, where's my hole? And then I try and make sure those pins are outside my hole that I've opened up at the back. And then I'll drill into that G10. I'll put it back on here and I'll make sure, cool, I can see wood, it's not over the hole. Put my screw together and I'll drill that one hole. Once I drill that one hole, I'll put a 2mm pin in there. Then I'll drill another hole next to that. So generally I'll do 3, 1, 2, and 1 down here at the bottom. Okay? Once you've done that one hole, you put that one in. Now, at this stage, the thing can still move around a little bit. So that's why we're going to put that pin in there. Then I'll drill the other hole, put the pin in, drill the last hole, put the pin in. Then I'm going to go to the disc and I want to disc it until those pins are absolutely flat. They flush with the top of that material. So I've started using G10 now because it's just cheaper. But before, what I would use is brass, because brass is nice because you can, a thin sheet of glass, you can actually glue it to the wood. So you don't have to worry about trying to hold it or bolt it in position. And then once you've done your holes, then you just heat it up a little bit and it loosens the glue, you take it off, and then you clean it up, you put it back into position, you put your pins in, you disc it flush. Then you put it all together, you put your back plate over there, you screw that on, and then you super glue that piece of material to the back part. Then you take that off, and then you drill backwards now through those holes. Okay? Then you take off those other pins out of there, you put those pins into the back, and you have them extending just a ball hair out. Again now, because when you drill those through the G10, you're using your hand like this. So when you put those in, they're all coming out like this. A little bit slightly, the angle is slightly wrong. So you can't have it going in 4mm, it just won't work. They just will not go in. So you've got to have it just a little peepee. And what I'll do is I'll stick it out a mill, and then I'll also just chamfer the edge of I'll make it sharp. So it leads in nicely, and then you've got maybe about a mil of actual true dimension of your 2mm or your 2mm pin. And that gives you a nice tight fit as it slides on there. Okay, so there you can see the little peepees. They're not very long.
You super glue those in?
Yeah, well, I'll just push them in.
Oh, okay.
You know, and you can super glue, but the problem with putting super glue is you end up with some super glue on the surface here.
Yeah.
You can't get it out, and then you've got a crap fit. Okay. And then, yeah, when it comes to the pommel screw, again, very simple. You know, 12mm piece of rod on the lathe, step it in 2mm either side, get an 8mm shoulder, part it off, grind it off, take a hacksaw, and you can cut a little groove in the back, and that's going to be your screw. And when you're done, you screw it, you put epoxy, put everything together if it's not a tear down. So I don't do tear downs. Well, at this point it's a tear down, but I haven't really got any requests. So I like to make sure it's nice and strong. So I put epoxy in there, screw everything together. Once it's done, I'll grind that right down flush. I need about 1mm of that peeping out. Okay. There's other options you can do, which I've done before. You can countersink so that this whole shoulder goes into there, then you grind it flush and you leave it slightly proud, having annealed it first, and then you can do some gentle peening work just to fill up that gap and then grind it flush. So there's nothing visible on the back anyway. You can do that too. Okay. As far as the length of the handle goes, with Bowie knives, it's not going to be the same old for your hunting knife. Hunting knives you're going to hold in a hammer fist grip like this. You're holding like this. This is a fighting knife, you're holding it in a fencing grip. So it's held like this. Okay, so you can see how much more handle you need there as opposed to when you're holding something in a fencing grip. Okay, you need that extra bit. So these are about 130mm, generally 135 sometimes, you know, depending on who it's for. This is a custom knife, so you can see if you feel this, you probably might find the handle's a little bit small for you. When you want to now put your pommel screw on, you're going to have your knife on here, and you're just going to eyeball. So depending on the back face here, you want your screw to come out 90 degrees to the angle of your back face. So once you've got that angle there, you're going to just put your knife on top, and you're going to lay your piece of threaded rod on there until it's at the right angle, and you can kind of get a rough idea of where it needs to be. Okay, and then once you've done that, you're going to grind your tang, put your piece of threaded rod on there, silver solder it on, grind the top flush, and then go and try it out. If If it doesn't work, you can, to a small extent, you can bend this a little bit, but then you might have to change the hole, the point of the hole. Okay, so it's good to get this to 90 degrees before you start messing around with your back plate. That's the last thing you do. So once you've got this done, you're going to push that through, see where that comes out, change your angle, and then you're going to get your hole to fit over there. Okay. Alright, I think that's pretty much the basics of it. Any other questions?
In terms of grinding, because some guys will do full flats, concave.
So I do a full flat, and you know, just for the aesthetic sake of it, you know, I like it when you got a nice straight edge here all the way, you know. But there's something to be said for grinding some of the spine away. And that is, you know, you can, if you're not happy with their balance entirely, you can steal some there, and that's the place to take it from, because you can't take it from anywhere else. You can't take it from your edge. You know, the material here is at a certain thickness. You don't want to make it any thinner. So you can steal a little bit away from your spine to take some weight off. But the nice thing about doing that also is that when you've got a flat grind, when you cut through something, the entire side of the knife is in contact with whatever you're cutting through. Whereas that's your V now. If you take away that spine side, you've only got half the bottom of the knife is going to be in contact when you're cutting something, and the rest of it's going to be missing, it's not going to be in contact. So you've got less surface area in contact, therefore less friction, therefore it's going to cut better. Okay. So, but, you know, we're talking about, like, you know, the difference between a swimmer shaving his legs and not shaving his legs, you know? Okay. Then, when it comes to apple seed in your edge, the Bowie knife is generally going to have an apple seed edge. That's like an axe edge, but not quite as heavy as an axe edge. It's a little bit less robust. And so essentially I'll grind down to my final thickness, which generally is about 10% the thickness of your spine. So on a Bowie knife, 7.5 mil, 0.7, you know, depending on what it's going to be used for. It's going to be a knife fighting knife, it's going to be a chopping knife. You know, if it's going to be a chopper, I'm going to leave it at a little bit thicker. I might even roll it a little bit more. So the way you do your apple seed is you put it on your belt, you gently lay it down on a 180 degrees, so you do your 180 grinding, then you're going to lay it down on the belt, gently. And all you're going to do is just gently rock the knife like this. As you're moving along, you rock the knife. Always staying perpendicular to the belt. So when it comes to the front here, you can't just run across the belt and just keep going like that. You have to follow it around like this. Make sure your edge is 90 degrees to your belt.
It's on the slack of your belt.
Yeah, on the slack between the two. Yeah, not on the flat plate. Yeah. And then you know, that depends on what the knife is for. So it's going to be, so this one is particularly sleek because this is a knife fight. This is not going to be chopping. It's not going to be clashing. This should hopefully just be hitting the skin. You know, if it's used for what it was the intention. Now the clip, generally you'll find you'll see everything out there. But it's the rule of thirds is good, okay? So generally your clip is nice if it's 1/3 the length of your entire knife. Halfway is okay. Once you start reaching past that, it starts to look a little bit weird. Your point starts getting a bit thin. But these are, you know, not hard and fast rules. These are just aesthetic things that you know, Kevin has showed me and that I've found to be true as well. You know, when I put those certain things into my knives, they tend to look nice. Okay. When it comes to your point, you want your point to be slightly above center of your knife. So when you go to stab something, if you hit anything, depending on where your point is, it's going to either kick you down or it's going to kick you up. Right? So we want our cutting edge to be kicked into whatever it is we're stabbing. So you don't want it to kick up like that into the blunter part of the knife. You want it to kick down into the sharper part of the knife. Right? So as soon as you it's inevitably going to start to push your hand down because your point's above your hand. So it drives the edge into the blade. Okay. Now, the nice thing about the clip as well, besides obviously the back cut, is that because it's sharpened, it penetrates better, and because it's not as sharp as the edge, it doesn't cut as well, but it ends up forcing your edge down and into the cut more than you would if you didn't have a clip. Okay. When it comes to the clip of the Bowie, you'll see them from, you know, flat to like pixie shoes, you know, where they're all curled up in the front, right? So generally what you like is take a ruler and put it across from point to point, and you're wanting just a small, maybe 1.5 millimeter gap in the middle of that clip there. That's going to give you a nice arc from that side to that side. And obviously it's going to progress, it's going to be at its widest point here, 1.5 to 2 mil over there, and it's going to progress down to nothing on either side evenly. So that's a nice even arc all the way. Okay.
Actually,
and that's what gives you
an optical illusion, like, because when you look at it, it looks a lot more.
Yes, yeah, no, yeah, it is. I mean, but it depends because there's, like I said, anything from flat all the way to a serious hook, but yeah, I mean, oftentimes it looks more dramatic than it actually is. Yeah.
When do you put that in? Before?
I do that when I'm doing my rough grinding. I do my rough grinding, and then when you do a finished grinding, you just get it back to the right shape that you want.
So the bevels first, and then the clip.
Generally, yeah. I don't forge my clip in. I just grind my clip in. So I'll forge in my distal taper. So you start at your point, you're forging out your profile, you get your point down. It's called a preform. So you're just getting a rough shape of what you want, and then you're going to come back and start where your ricasso is. You forge out what's called a frog's eye. So you start hammering right there. You lay up your ricasso where you want your ricasso to be, right against the edge of the anvil, and then your hammer edge is also against the edge of the anvil. Never comes over here, and the ricasso never comes onto the anvil. And you carefully hammer over here, right here. That's going to smush out the back of your blade. Because what happens if you forge from the front of the knife towards the back, you tend to end up with a much longer knife than you intended. Because you start forging lacquer, because when you're over here, you're wild. You can just swing that hammer and really go for it. When it comes to here, you've got to be particularly careful that you don't hammer beyond that point, otherwise you're shifting your ricasso back. You're making your ricasso not crisp. So they make a mistake, a little bit further back, a little bit further back, a little bit further back, and you end up with this sword instead of a Bowie knife. Okay? So it's nice to know more or less where you're working from. Start your Bowie, pull out that your plunge, your choil here, what they call the frog's eye, and then you start to hammer out everything else from there. Okay. I forge down my edge generally to about 2 to 2.5 millimeters prior to hardening. You're going to get some decarburization. You might get a little bit of warping. The thinner it is, obviously, the faster it's going to warp. So the thicker you leave it, the less likely. But when you're doing a hamon like this with a clay temper, there's a fine line between too thick and too thin. Because if it's too thick, that line is going to be below your clay. And if it's too thin, you may crack it. But if it's not thin enough, you're not going to get that desired outcome that you're looking for. Especially here on the clip side. If you want this to come around on this side, this needs to cool down fairly quick. If it's too thick, it's not going to do that.
So when you're hammering in your bevels, your knife naturally wants to follow a curve upwards.
Yeah.
This has a curve downwards. This knife, right? About Bowie.
No, not necessarily. I mean, generally, it's straight sort of 3/4 of the way, and then from this point here, it starts to come up. My knife, so I like a little bit of a recurve, so I put a little bit of what I call the lady lines, just some hips and thighs. So just a little bit of sleeking in here and then back out there.
What I want to ask though is, do you like account for the fact that you're going to be hammering in those bevels, so you bring the point down a little bit further?
You can do that. So some people like to, you get what's called banana ring. So as you're hammering out this material, you're stretching this material, that's not getting stretched, so it's got to go somewhere. So it tends to start to banana up, okay? So what we do is just try and keep that under control the whole time. You can forge the whole thing out, and from that massive banana, you can get it all the way down. But remember, the more it goes up, the more it's going to be a mission to put it back. Because when you start pushing it down, your edge now has got to go somewhere, so it starts to wrinkle sideways like that, because you're pushing it down. Okay, so it's best to forge some, push it down, make that little correction of that little bit of wrinkle that's caused, and then carry on forging. So with forging, it's always a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You forge a little bit, you correct it. You forge a little bit, you lose your shape, you put it back into shape, and you just keep doing that, and eventually you'll get there. Okay. Any other questions?
Going back to the clip again, disc, wheel, belt.
So I use if you got no curve to it, you can use a flat grinder, a flat grinding attachment. You can work it just like that. And then with the wheel, if I've got a bit of a hollow to it, then I use you can use whatever you want. I've got a 250 mm wheel. That's what I've had for the last 15 years. Is what I use. So then you're going to come and put your eye on top here. I generally will start at this point here, and then start to move up and down a little bit, because you've got to push this back. If you try and have it from this point, it tends to bleed in quite dramatically like this. It curls up like that. It doesn't look nice. You want it to stretch out slightly beyond that point and come to a point of its own. Okay, and then you're just going to go. Obviously, the more you turn your edge towards the knife, the sleeker and sleeker that angle is going to be. The more dramatic it's going to cut and sharper it's going to be. The more you pull your edge away from the thing, the more and more acute it's going to be, and the more and more robust it's going to be. Okay. So hollow ground will do that for you. And then I'll just go through my grits, 60, 180, 400, and then I'll hand sand any little issues out with a flat stick, and then go from there.
And as Monty mentioned, you've got a particular way of sharpening the tip.
Oh yeah,
so
you can see. No, I mean that's something I learned from Bagwell. You know, that's what he was doing, and it made sense to me. And having made some knives for Monty and some of the other guys that do some knife training, you can see there it's just slightly rolled over. So all I do is I'll do it like normal. So it's got this little sharp point there. I'll take a flat stick and some 1200 sandpaper, and I'll just work my way like this, all the way around the edge. Like that, from this side all the way around there, and it gives you a little radius that's now sharp all the way around. You can see it bites all the way around. Okay, and obviously it makes it just a little bit more robust as well.
That's just a stupid question. I'm not a knife maker. It's something that I've always wondered. Do you start off with something slightly oversized to allow you to take material off?
100%.
Like, do you sort of, when you balance it, do you sort of do a final balancing, or do you start balancing it right from the beginning?
Well, for me, you know, it depends. If it's something I'm just making for myself, then you know I'm constantly feeling it, and you know at this stage I want to know that it's got a good feel.
Okay.
But in general, that distal taper is what gives you that good feel. So as long as you've got a decent distal taper, you're 90% of the way there.
Yeah.
You know, then it's a case of what does the customer want. You know, does he feel it's a bit heavy or a bit light, and you can make some adjustments.
The handle on, is it slightly oversized to allow you to take
100%, yeah, everything. But the nice thing is that the pommel is the key. You know, that's gonna really help you balance everything out. So if you feel like it needs more weight, it's too blade heavy, you increase that from 6 to 8 more.
Okay.
If it's still not right, take it to 10 more. You know, until you feel okay now.
So there's many
now it's
places on the knife that you can play around.
100%, yeah. So I mean, you know, if you want a knife that's particular weight, I'm gonna grind it, you know, in a way that's gonna give me that mash that you need, you know. But in my way of doing it is different to Bagwell's, where I'm not a fan of grinding, you know, over that side. But that he did only for his balance sake, you know what I'm saying? And for me, it's about aesthetics more than anything else, you know? It's only you and the few people that know about that information that is looking for that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? And with a distal taper, most people like yourself, you picked it up this morning. I haven't ground away the spine at all, but you can feel that mass is just, it's a big difference.
Exactly.
And it's in the taper and the tang, and obviously taking into consideration your pommel, just try and give that balance a little bit better. Yeah.
Thank you. And the heat treatment, differential or overall?
Yeah, I mean, generally with the high carbon steels, I do differential heat treatment. So I'm going to do an edge quench, or like this one, I'm going to clay temper. So we've got a soft to sort of springy body, and then we've got a hardened edge on it. With a Bowie knife, generally you want to quench, you know, 1/3 down here and coming out. Well, most knives, any knives really that I'm making, whether they're small hunting knives or whatever, I'm 1/3 here and 1/3 there. So you got generally running from about there all the way down to here. So you've got a nice chunk of your knife that's going to be tough, and a good section of your knife that's hard.
And what Rockwell are you aiming for on the edge?
Oh, it depends. I mean, it all depends on what steel. You know, I want to go for as hard as I can, but with a Bowie knife, you know, you're generally going to be at about 200 tempering. You know, you know, again, what is it going to be used for?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a knife fighting knife? Then we can leave it a little bit harder, because you're not going to be putting that thing to the test. And if I know Monty, he's certainly not going to be clashing against someone else's knife. He'll rather put his arm in the way first so he doesn't damage his knife. You know, so I'll leave it a little bit harder, and then if it's going to be something that's going to be used to chop wood in a bush, and you know someone's going to be taking it to a scout camp and hunting together with it, I'll push up my tempering a little bit more, so you know it's going to, you know, withstand it. You know, and then again also depending on what steel it is. This is 1070, 0.7% carbon, a little bit higher temper. The 5160, you don't have to do as much. You know, it's already in its nature a bit tougher, and it's got less carbon, so it's not going to get as hard, so you don't have to temper as hard.
I noticed you mentioned the pommel's like your main weighting thing, but I noticed there's a flare to the back on most of the handles, even Monty's knives.
Yeah.
That's
so,
obviously weighting and
but that's more for the fact that this knife is meant to be slung around. You know, so you're wanting to have a little bit of larger dimension in the back, that your hand doesn't just slip off of it. You know. I mean, that's also why those coffin handles are so popular, because you've got that nice little recurve at the bottom there, that you really, your hand gets bashed up against when it starts to get swung around.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, anything else?
Guards, obviously we've seen oval, we've got C-shape, we've got...
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, there's some typical, you know, quintessential classic styles, you know, the half penny guards, the oval guards, you know, the coffin shaped guards, but really anything goes, you know. Obviously your C-shape, your C-guard, But yeah, I think these days we tend to, you know, even myself, I'm starting to go back to the old school. You know, you want to make stuff that was classic and, you know, and worked well. I mean, but then again, I've done some stuff that's just completely artistic. You know, I'm trying to do something a bit different, something a bit new, and it doesn't always work. You know, so sometimes it's nice to stick with what you know works well. You know.
With a coffin handle, would you keep the tang very much the same as you do there?
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends. If it's got if it's got a if it's got a you know, if it's got a pawl on the back, then I would do the same construction. Otherwise, what I do is I'll drill it out 3/4 of the way, and then file it open, and then put a pin through. You know, epoxy everything, and then drill a pin through. Often what I will do, this is a little trick to help you. I don't know if you've ever found this. Sometimes you start drilling through, and the steel may be a little bit hard. Still manage to drill through it, but what happens is your 2 mil bit starts to flex a little bit, and then your hole on this side is bigger than it is on that side.
Yeah.
So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just drill with a tungsten carbide bit if I can't get through with the normal bit, an oversized hole, 6 mil or 8 mil or whatever, and then I'll plug that with a bit of brass, turn it on the lathe, put it in there, and then I'll just pin it in there so it's fixed in there, grounded flush, and then when you're drilling through, it just drills smoother through the brass and does give you less issue as far as your holes go. Yeah.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
really a curveball on this road to you.
Mm-hmm.
Just your opinion. I once saw a Bowie knife that had this sort of philosophy on where you could undo something over and attack the handle, and you have like about 3 or 4 different guards that you could fit.
Yeah.
So
So that'll be your tear down, Bowie. So the only difference to that is most of the time you'll see, instead of doing a screw at the back, they keep this a cylinder, a small cylinder. They might do a little bit of shaping on the lathe or whatever, and then drill a hole through it. And then all you do is take a little Allen key or a little piece of rod, you put it through the hole, and you twist it off like a tap. And then you can change out your handle, change out your guard.
It even seems like having 2 or 3 different handles.
100%, yeah. That's why people like the tear down Bowies.
Yeah.
And also if you've got fittings that can maybe degrade, Damascus, high carbon steel, maybe you need to take it all apart at some point so you can redo it and finish it. Where on the knife you can't do that.
Would that be very expensive to do?
Come talk to me, Marty. It's not particularly. It's a bit more work, you know. But
and
obviously,
in terms of strength, how do you feel about that?
I think it's as long as you get this fitting well, and you've got enough thread in here. I mean, you want to have, you know, at least what is the rule of thumb there? It's as thick it is as you want it to go down. So if you've got 6 mil here, you want it to go down at least 6 mil, and that's about as strong as you can get that thread to be, you know. But for, you know, a knife fighting purpose, it's going to be ample, you know, because your bolster as well, your bolster's got a good fit, and that is, you know, it's bolstering your handle material.
Yeah.
So when you pin that in, it locks it in position there, and your stresses are, you know, being absorbed by your brass, not so much your handle, you know. And then again, with it coming through the back and being screwed up there, you've also got connection point onto brass there, which is, it's fairly strong, you know. But like myself, like I said, I epoxy everything, even if it is all screwed together. You know, but in a tear-down environment, you know, as long as you get that good fit where you haven't got miles of wobble around inside there, it's good and strong.
Is this the problem we have in the tail with the humidity and dry?
Things
you know,
shrinking and swelling.
you know,
And,
we find that the handle sometimes cracks.
yeah.
And if you've got a tear down, it's so much easier.
But you
to
know,
bring it
Monty,
to
the
the
thing is these days we're using stabilized wood, which they weren't using 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know?
That's unlikely.
So, yeah, these days you're not having issues with that so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
As
Especially
long
with the
as it's tight
stabilized
too, and
pools.
there's no place for moisture to get into it.
Yeah.
That's also quite a thing.
Yeah. But I mean, I know Monty's not going to be walking around in the rain with his knife.
Yeah.
He'll have a raincoat just for his knife.
Yeah. That thickness and your depth of your thread, what you just mentioned.
Yeah, so just, you know, if you've got...
Always, I think the rule of thumb is to have 3 threads longer.
No, the best is to have as wide as, so if you've got 8 mil rod, you want to go 8 mil down. 6 mil rod, 6 mil down. Because essentially if you go down further, it's not going to get any stronger than it was at that maximum. That's like the maximum strength you can get out of it. Because then the rod's going to break before the threads break.
Alright.
You know what I mean?
I heard somewhere, but you always give it 3 extra threads. I don't know why. You know.
Well, the more the merrier, you know. But at some point, you see, you can't make it too long because you're going to start hitting out, you're going to start bottoming out over here. So it all depends on how long your tang is as well.
Correct.
You know.
Just saying.
From an engineering point of view, a nut is 80% the thickness of a bolt diameter.
Okay.
So a 10 mil bolt is an 8 mil thick nut. So that's the engineering standard. Obviously steel on steel, so thickness for brass is more.
So if you can match it up 6
Yeah.
to 6, that's as good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
actually
that's good.
over what they
Yeah,
would do.
with
in
brass is
engineering.
weak, but steel on steel is 80%.
Okay.
That's it.
But then copper fittings as opposed to brass.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong. They're nice. I mean, in a Bowie knife fighting situation, it's probably better because it's very sticky. You hit a knife into that guard, it's probably going to bite in that sucker. You'll be able to manipulate his blade a little bit easier. But yeah, I would say that the copper's probably tougher. You know, it's got more malleability to it. The brass is probably a bit more brittle. Not very brittle, but more brittle than the copper would be.
Which is the easiest one to work with?
I would say brass. Yeah, because copper it tends to your bits get stuck in it.
Burn
Yeah,
your
it just
fingers.
breaks your bits off and yeah, it's very sticky. So yeah, it heats up super quick as well. So a bit of a ball ache, but I like it because it gives a nice patina. Especially if you take your time and while it's starting to patina, you just rub that thing with your fingers like on the daily. It starts to get almost like an oily finish, a bluey color to it. It looks really really cool. Yeah. But yeah, it's not these days people like things that don't take any care. You know, the less I have to worry about it, the better. So it's mostly stainless, and you know, copper's the last on the list because it tarnishes the fastest. You know.
Okay, just one last question. It's always intrigued me. The possibility of bluing a blade.
Yeah.
If it's hard carbon.
Yeah. So when you mentioned earlier about that knife being blue, there's a guy in the States, I can't remember his name now, Willie something or other. He I watched one of his DVDs when I was doing my apprenticeship. And he does everything in his backyard, and like his way was to he would say like you read about all these old knives and talk about the blue blades, and that's just his tempering cycle. So you know he would bring it up to a spring temper. So you know that's why they were so bloody indestructible, because we're doing it generally to straw color. Straw color is 180, 200 degrees, something depending on what steel you're using, and then it starts to move through to your sort of burgundy, and then into a purple, and then into a dark blue. That dark blue generally with 5160, I think it's about 300 degrees. That's a spring temper. So that's like for throwing knives. So that's how they were tempering those knives. That's why they leave them with a tempering color on them, so they were that blue color. And that's why they knew that those blue blades are so great, because they were indestructible, because they were spring tempered. So they didn't hold an excellent edge, but you couldn't break that thing. Yeah. Anybody? Any questions? Okay.
David, thank you very
No
much.
going on dry. No going on